Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am really excited to be joined today by Aishath Huda, who is a Chicago based visual artist from the Maldives. And she makes work that investigates the relationship between bodies, environment, empathy, and knowledge building. Her research aims to find ways to transition from a human centered worldview into a more expansive sense of we. She considers water as an access point to we and collaborates with water to recognize water outside of human needs and knowledge and logic. And I'm really excited to get into all of those things today. She has an MFA from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She co founded Fine Art Maldives, an artist collaborative in Maldives, and co curates the exhibitions at Gallery 350, which is its affiliated gallery. She worked as arts coordinator and teaching artist at the Maldives National University. And Huda's work has been shown nationally and internationally, including at Gallery 400 in Chicago, the Maldives National Art Gallery, Metafora in Barcelona, Santa Rosa Monastery in Sardinia, and so many more. I encourage you to check out her full bio in the show notes below, as well as ways to find her website, where to follow her on social media, and stay in touch with all the things that she's up to. Huda, do you have any things that you would like to add to that as a way to bring us into the conversation, or do you feel like that was a complete way to get the listeners to know you?
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I think that covers all. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
more than covers.
Beautiful. Well, obviously, we're going to talk a lot about water today, which I feel really excited about. But I think maybe as a way of bringing some context to your work and what you're exploring, do you mind sharing a little bit about your background? Do you feel like there's anything in your background that really led you to exploring water in your work, whether that was geography or some childhood experiences, etc.? Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your
Yeah, sure.
background?
Um, I have always had a fascination for water. Uh, Mostly how it when I was a child, when I was a kid, I was fascinated with how water magnifies and distorts things, and I would put objects in glass vessels filled with water, submerge them, and then try to paint them. They were never good. Um, but if I were to recall a specific period in my life, it would be during my BFA. I studied in China for 5 years, and I spent an extensive amount of time learning Chinese painting. Mm, we would work with Chinese ink, water, and mostly rice paper. And I was drawn to water flows and absorption. And the hesitancy I felt into interrupt water in using a brush, like when you have to use a brush in painting. And gradually, the ink and its application became secondary to water behavior. I was more interested in how water behaves on the surface. It took me days to finish a small painting because I would just wait. um, this also led me to dig deeper into the material processes in paintings and what we consider materials in an artwork. I mean, it is interesting how we sometimes um, overlook certain materials in an artwork. Um, I mean, like ink and water painting, water plays a central role. It's always present, always actively dripping, saturating, binding, and eventually evaporating. But it's we don't mention it, like let's say if in our material it's in an artwork or anything. So this was roughly a decade ago, but since then my interest in representing water has waned because water can't represent itself. That's how I felt. So I think it's more important to try to find more water centric ways to work with. So that's what I'm trying to do now. And I'm also more than 60% water. And I come from a place, an island nation of almost 99% ocean water. So for me, water has always held a significance beyond its utilitarian value. And growing up, our daily rhythms were intricately tied to the ebb and flow of uh, cycles of water, tides and cycles of water. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you
So I
for
think there
sharing
are a
that.
lot of water things in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also really trying to imagine kind of growing up in a place with that much water everywhere all the time.
Hmm.
And then how it would feel to go somewhere where that wasn't the case. Like it's a way that you kind of like for me when I'm somewhere like in Atlanta for instance, we're surrounded by trees, like so many trees. We're called the city in the forest. And I don't really notice it. I'm so used to it until I go somewhere else and I'm like, where are all the trees?
Oh yeah.
And I'm imagining that that might also translate if you grew up being completely surrounded by water in such a huge way, and then potentially sometimes going places where you're like, "Where's all the water?"
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'm. I mean, it's funny that you brought it up because I think I think about water more, at least consciously, more when I'm not home. So I did a series of paintings right after my graduation, which I just mentioned that, which was when I was really focused on water, but I had an exhibition right after, so I worked on this exhibition for like a series of painting for 2 years, but I didn't use water. It was not water. It was more about how we see things, and it's about multiple perspectives. But wa- water was not consciously on my mind then. But
mm,
when I like as you've mentioned with the trees, like when I uh, move somewhere else, or when I go or travel somewhere else, water is always on my mind. So I think it's also a very human thing that we always think about things when we are not with them. Oh, yeah.
for sure.
Mm.
Um, I really early when you were talking earlier, kind of working um, more. Like you talked about, like you felt like you were interrupting water a lot, like when working with the brush, and you know, I'm wondering how what has shifted in your relationship with water as you work with it. Maybe it sounds like you've moved from a place of feeling like interrupting water to more like allowing water to sort of drive the process like on its own terms. Do you mind speaking more about that or what that's looked like in your practice or in your work?
Uh, as in, you mean letting the water do its own thing
Mm-hmm.
on the surface? Um, so I think that is when I started thinking more about the collaboration aspect of it. Um, water, I mean, I used to paint waterscapes when I was young and painting and really excited about everything. But when I was, t- when I was, as I've mentioned, when I was making Chinese painting and then slowly allowing water to do what water does best, just flowing fluid and evaporating, and it has become I have started realizing more that this is not, I'm letting, like, water is doing this, not me. I'm facilitating this. So uh, I think it's the collaboration. The work I'm doing now with water, it's a collaboration. People ask me how I collaborate with water. I mean, it's always hard to answer that question because um, we we have a language that, to my knowledge, a syntactical language that, to my knowledge, water. doesn't speak. I mean, like my knowledge. So it's easier to. I mean, I see the work as some kind of and or maybe ask more questions about it. I don't consider anything as answers. Maybe like to yeah, more questions. But like if we are talking about collaboration, we are talking about collaboration right now, right? So if we are talking about collaboration, I it's easier for me to talk about time because I think what I have what I have come to understand is if I follow my time, my human time when I'm working with water, it doesn't make sense because then how would I know what I mean? Then it means I already have this preconceived information of what this thing is about, right? So let's say I sometimes um, record the weather. Like I would write down the temperature of the day, but I never write the time because I think the time is in the work that we are doing, Water and I we are doing. So I try to follow the time that is embedded in the water, uh, which means just letting water be. I mean, it gets easier sometimes because I am human. Sometimes I would uh, like flip out of it, but then it's also a lot of waiting and noticing, and then just letting, like reiterating, and like a lot of these things, and just water be. I mean, just trying to not even understand, just try to listen and learn from water without without our idea of water. Yeah. I hope
Do
that
you
answers your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Thank you. And do you feel like it's changed how you perceive yourself as an artist? Like, has it changed at all, sort of how you view your role in the work at all?
Um,
Moving to sort of like, I don't hear a lot of artists talk about, I hear it a lot when I'm talking about like dance because the material is other bodies, so to speak.
mhm,
And so, of course, we're collaborating with other bodies. But I don't hear a lot of people who work with visual media talking about their materials as something that they're collaborating with. And I'm wondering if, as you've moved to like, I'm collaborating with water as opposed to directing or interrupting water,
mhm.
has that changed sort of how you see your role as an artist at all?
Um, yeah, I think so. As you've mentioned, dance, maybe I should. That is interesting. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with um, a lot of artists who do performance art.
Hmm.
Maybe during the last 2 years, also because of yeah. But yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, because dance is about bodies. But yeah, it has changed because I mean it has changed in a way that I do not notice because it's a very gradual change, and it's also changed. I think like how the way I be, it's also, I mean, it comes through the work I make. So it's very, I cannot sometimes separate those two because because it's also about the thinking. So uh, making decisions and facilitating and slowly realizing that I am not the center of this making, um, and water having the agency. I mean, yeah, I think it has taught me empathy a lot and care too, not only toward water or the materials that I use, also toward people. Yeah, I also do these portrait paintings, where I paint um, faces of I call them facescapes. So faces of people I navigate in the public sphere, like on the trains and buses. Uh, so I paint them from memory, and water. Of course, I like wet the paper and when water evaporates, the image settles. But I think it has a role with the memory. I mean, our brain is mostly water too. So I sometimes want, like when dehydration affects memory, right? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I always wonder there must be a connection, like water and memory too. But yeah, it has this process over the years has taught me. I feel that to be a more empathetic and person toward like
Mm,
my environment and the people. Yeah.
I love that. Um, you you mentioned in the bio that you sent me that we live in a world that is really driven and validated by quote logic,
Mm-hmm.
and you said, I feel like finding knowing or gaining wisdom through creative processes, especially when they're combined with the more than human world, really challenges that, or it may even oppose the belief that logic is the only way to know or the only, like, quote, real way to know. Do you mind speaking about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Um, I mean, we clearly need a shift in how we think about and engage with the world. If you're talking about logic, acknowledging that all species and systems are co-creators would be the ultimate logical thing to do. But obviously, this isn't the belief of the majority of us. I mean, there are many people and cultures who acknowledge this and are living in harmony with the rest of nature. But the logic we have, I mean, I think it's time. I mean, yeah, it's over time, but I think um, we should work as much as understanding the knowledge of, not like acknowledging the knowledge of um, the rest of the entities that who cohabit the world with us. I mean, I mean, it doesn't even make sense that everything, like we are the center, like we believe that we are the center of everything, and even with the facts, the scientific facts, or anything that we call facts, um, we have a hypothesis. We want to find a certain thing, so we experiment and we keep on reiterating. I mean, I am not. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Yes, we have all the technology and medical advances because of that, but I think we also should we could gain a lot more by um, listening closely to our surroundings and environments, and the logic could be. I mean, yeah. I mean, why can't the logic be um, about trying to at least imagine the perspectives of, right, other
Mm-hmm.
things? I don't know if I answered your question. I think I.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. You touched on, I love that you were saying, like you said, acknowledge the knowledge of the other beings that we kind of live with on this planet. And I think something that is coming to mind as you're saying that is that, for me, this is what I'm thinking, is sort of like maybe not like appreciating or even elevating the creative process to be an equally valid way of learning about the world. and acquiring knowledge to the scientific process. I think right now we're like, if it's not scientific process, we're not imposing a hypothesis on something that's happening, it's not really
Mhm,
valid.
mhm,
But the creative process is equally explorative and is more open-ended and is has more of that like listening quality that you're talking about. I'm wondering, do you feel like what do you feel about the creative process as a way of sort of absorbing knowledge? Do you feel like that's the way you go about learning the world? Um, is through your creative process?
mm, yes, sure. Yeah, yeah. Because the creative process, it's like I mean, I guess, we cannot talk about this without talking about the language as we know it, like words. But the the things we make through different kinds of experimentation, it becomes a different kind of language. I mean, it's not words, but it's a different way of um, understanding things too. So this has definitely um, taught me. Could you repeat the last part of your question? I'm sorry.
Basically, if focusing on the creative process as a really valid way of learning or sort of absorbing knowledge about the world and
Mhm.
how you relate to that process or getting knowledge in that way.
I think there's always no, something new and exciting just like within the process, right? Like art as a discipline, we do not like from the point of collecting, gathering, reading, writing to observing, listening, waiting, and reiterating. I mean, the work always become a part of my thinking process, and the work inform each other too. So it's not always me like planning an idea and okay, this is how this is going to look like. I'm going to make this, so this would be like this, you know. Instead, it's more like it comes through the work. It informs each other. Um, so I sometimes I cannot separate works because there's like a connection to each other. Uh, and the information, it does not always come from what I read or what I see. It also comes from this work. So like a text, this work adds to the other work too, right? If I'm making sense. Um, I rarely plan the formal details, as I've said, but most of the times I don't know, or I don't even want to know. Um,
Mm.
Sometimes I would make decisions on the scale or size as it is contingent on the surface I choose or a container that is available or the size of my studio or
Yeah.
the space available in my refrigerator. Uh, I mean, I don't view art making as something separate from my life. So yeah, it keeps on informing and yeah. And so sometimes let's say if the work is like a 15 by 15-inch iceberg, and that's just because it's the space available in my refrigerator, right? But sometimes I would make work outside during a heavy snowfall, and this would change everything. So yeah, so it's the planning happens within the work. Yeah.
That's making me think of a couple of things. That one of my friends who works in a few different mediums, one of them being kind of sculpture, and the rule was that he could never make a sculpture bigger than the size of the hatchback in his car. Because how would he get it where he's going? But
Yeah.
but the other thing it makes me think of too is that or like the way that I relate to creative process is that I feel like the work or the spirit of the work, however we want to talk about it, has its own ideas about how it wants to get made. Like when I'm making a dance or something, it feels very much like Like it's more like when I see the ending of something or when I see this certain part materialize or something happens in rehearsal, it's suddenly I'm like, that's it. That's what it wants to be. Like I feel like I'm recognizing it as opposed to that I'm like generating all of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like it's almost like I'm like finding it as opposed to making it from scratch in a way. Is sort of my
Yeah,
idea.
and that also exactly. Yeah, I mean that is also those kind of moments. They feel like, okay, so I wasn't. This is not me, right? It's like I didn't do this. I just recognized it.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's. I think that is also like a collaborative. Like that's a collaboration when that happens. Like you didn't make the major decisions, but you recognize, okay, this is the thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Do you mind describing for people who are listening that aren't familiar with your work yet, some of the ways that you've been working with water and ink and paper recently? Like some of the way, just to give them, because I think when a lot of people think about that, they're thinking about these kind of traditional, kind of illustrative watercolors, for instance. And do you mind
Mhm.
describing for the listeners some of the ways that you've been working with water lately?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I mostly use the same materials, um, but yeah. So okay. So in my recent work, I use pretty much Chinese ink, which is made out of soot, mulberry paper, which I found to be one of the best surfaces to let water be like do its own thing without
Mm.
absorbing and making beautiful, effects. Um, and gradually other materials comes and goes. Sometimes they stay, um, if because water is also relational. So when I'm working with water, I bring in other materials, but if it doesn't go well with the collaborations, I would sometimes let it aside and continue with the same materials. So now, yeah, it's just. But I am currently working with activated charcoal, which is a key material in most water filtrations. So I would describe, maybe, let's say, one work, to someone who hasn't seen. I was thinking about what happens during a transformation process of water. So let's say from solid to liquid to gas, right? So I did this work last year where I collected water from Lake Michigan. I was called it Michigan Lake. I don't know why. Yeah, Lake Michigan, and then I contaminated it with ink. Um, Froze it to a large ice block, and then got a stack of mulberry papers. And when the ice cube melt, like thaws, it submerges into this stack because instead of one sheet, it's a stack. So it goes like inside, right? And like a cross section of what is happening. But
Mm.
I don't like to do it in like a discovering investigative way, but just sort of like a recording of what would anyway happen. So this it was really interesting to me. Like I didn't even think about what would happen. So when it took days, but when it absorbed and filtrated and like evaporated, and when everything was dry, when I went through the sheets, obviously the top sheet was the the same shape of the ice block, a square, but the bottom sheet, it has small circles.
Mm.
So it went from a square to circles, and so the filtration process we can see it through the ink. um, so that's the role of ink in my work, to trace, to so that it's visible. What happens is visible. So yeah, so that is one work, and I did some work last winter. It was a coldest day. I didn't know it was the coldest day then, but it was really cold. Um, I did the work outside, and it was snowing heavily, but it just changed in seconds to sleet, and then it became slush. Like it was changing really quickly.
Wow.
Sometimes we don't even notice this, but like, oh, I was making work outside. I can see it on the work. I mean, I
Yeah, for
can
sure.
show.
For people who are watching the video, for sure.
So this like a, I mean, so this is,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So you see the crystallization and the slush,
Mm-hmm.
like everything you can see on the work. So, yeah. So that
Wow.
is one work too. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, it feels really beautiful because it feels like, you're sort of documenting movement in a way. And I know you said you're like, oh, I don't know a lot about performance, but your work feels very performative in a way. Like it feels very in the way that it's like it's really time based. Um, and there's just the way that sort of like you're moving through time with the work feels um, really interesting and beautiful. And I love that you're sort of using ink as a way to trace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
also, yeah, that is, maybe I should look into more performance artists. Yeah. Yeah. I have this thing where I don't want to be a, like the center of attention, so the performance art sounds very scary to me. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, well, I don't know. I'm working with Rust now, which I always follow water, so I was following Chicago's waters, like water from Lake Michigan and the tap water and Chicago River, and it took me to Rust.
Wow.
So yeah, so I'm working with Rust too now. Yeah.
Which also has like its own kind of particular pigment and
Mm-hmm,
color
mm-hmm.
as well. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. You speak about, you know, there's a way that we tend to, we've already talked a little bit about the way that we have this like kind of human centric view of the world. And you have some thoughts about how, you know, abstracting water really affects our humanity or it affects our climate literacy as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think okay. So I think we see ourselves as superior to more than human, obviously. Like that's how we see it. And we also believe that nature is something that is out there. Like we are outside nature, but we are part of nature. We are nature too. And this affects how we care, or the level of care and empathy we have toward both human and more than human. Um, so water is considered something that is out there too, because it's always readily available to, at least to the modern world, right? To the developed world. Um, we don't think about where the water comes from when we take showers or when we drink water every day. I mean, this water could, like this water I'm drinking, it could have been the sweat of a horse from millions of, like thousands of years ago, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
the same water, but it's also many, like water is both local and global at the same time. So when we abstract water, or when we reduce it to H2O, a formula, or categorizing it as merely a utility and ultimately a commodity, we take the place out of water. And
Mm.
this influences how we perceive accountability and our sense of responsibility toward water and climate issues. I mean, climate issues are water issues are climate issues. I read a book by Jamie Linton. He's a geographer. He writes about modern water, and he describes. I forgot the name. I think the name of the book is. Well, I look for it, but he talks about modern water and describes the tap or faucet as something that symbolizes the placeness of water because like it's so readily available we don't get to think about it. I mean, if you think about it, living off grid or in a situation where reusing grey water or domestic wastewater is required, water is always the organizing factor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a consciousness that comes from not having running water. I grew up with water wells, and we would have these small tin cans and a stick inside it so we can actually just, yeah. And like I can still feel the weight of water because we would, when the water gets too salty, um, we would have to, there like each island they have like huge rainwater tanks, like they would collect rainwater, and we would have to go and all the mosques will have these tanks, rainwater
Mm-hmm.
tanks. And we would like every morning we would go to the mosque to collect the rainwater, and it's heavy like the carrying, right? So it's a like it's you feel the weight of water. You don't think that water is something abstract, something that's so easily available. um, and carrying something relatively heavy engages our entire body, and when this is part of our everyday life, the weight it extends into memory through our body, um, and this positions water, and creates a kind of, again, can empathy, like a connection to water. Yeah, I I think this abstraction, like this disconnection, not only with water, like with everything, with even like other humans, right? It certainly affects um, how we address the climate crisis we are in. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it is also why we are in this. We don't know for sure, but I think it is possibly one of the main reasons why we are in this, yeah, situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think there's some really beautiful kind of like images and illustrations in what you just said. And it was making me, thinking about the tap and just sort of the availability or this kind of commodification of water and even removing us a little bit from like sort of taking for granted that it's always there. Whereas for hundreds of thousands of years,
Mm-hmm.
you know, life has congregated around water as like with this really innate primal knowledge that like it's not something that we can live without. So it's best that we gather near it, or if we build a home, then we build a home next to it, or it's just a really intricate connection to thriving into life is when water is present. Um, Even just like as from an evolutionary perspective, is like we have originated from water.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. I found the name of the book.
oh,
It's
great.
called "What Is Water: The History of Modern Abstraction."
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
that's a good book. Like, it talks about, yeah, water
Nice.
abstraction.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll put that in the show notes for people so that they can find it if they're.
No, I think I'd love to listen more about your work with water.
A lot of my work with water has been a lot about my spiritual practice, which I don't consider separate from my creative practice. I feel like creativity is very much connected to how I conceive myself um, as a human being and what it means to be human, what it means to be on the planet, and sort of the story around being a human on the planet right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of water for me has been about like in a lot of spiritual traditions, water is sort of this way that we conceive of the soul and is the thing that infuses being a human in a way. And I think a lot of the things that you're saying about water as we encounter it in our tangible world could also be reflected in how we conceive of water in more of that spiritual sense. Where, like, if we're talking about the soul, it's like always an abstraction, or in a way that, like, oh, people that think about that are sort of silly or fluffy, and that's not a real way of
Yeah.
knowing anything. Um, and I found that the more that I really embrace that element of my story and that element of myself, the more resonance I feel in the world, the more I feel like I'm tracking with myself and with the world around me, the more in alignment I am with what feels correct and alive. I've been very much a student of permaculture these last few years, and a big component of that is what is it to, like, quote, manage water, or it made me notice water in a really new and beautiful way, like on landscapes, or especially in urban design and things like that. A lot of the ways that we take for granted or really don't care for water in some really obvious ways. And that's been a very tangible and practical way that's informed how I'm moving through the world as well. So
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is really interesting, like permaculture. Yeah. It's so like are you working with a group who is how does that like do you, like is it part of your creative process, or it's just you are working with them?
I think it's more of a quality that infuses my creative process at this point, as
Okay.
opposed to an actual material. It's more of a quality of the fluidity and the connection and the flow. And I think Dream World, there's a series of performances that happen in and around different bodies of water. But that's not in my body of work yet, at least not documented. It definitely is in some
Mm,
documented things that I've done. But and a lot of the artists that I really like look up to, and um, their work really means something to me. Water has been something that they've really, like, worked with and embodied in some really beautiful ways in their performance and in their practice. So
yeah, yeah. Like it's sometimes a lot of people think that because I don't know. It's like the thing. It sometimes it's hard to describe these things, right?
mhm.
And it becomes people think it is more on the spiritual side or religious. It's a religious thing because we don't have the words for like how to describe it. So we'll have to like a lot of feel like we talk about the feelings, our feelings toward it, and this becomes irrelevant because then it doesn't have enough facts.
Yeah.
So right. So yeah, I think working any kind of it doesn't have to be even not even like spiritually, physically, or even a little bit more interest towards like how we engage ourselves with water, like even when we are drinking water, like giving some thoughts to it. That could be like really beneficial. I mean, we have enough facts, statistics, like we have policies, discussions, like, but we are actually not focusing enough to the actual thing.
Hmm.
Instead of we are focusing on the facts that we created, which are also very important, of course, but like as you've mentioned, like actually going and focusing on this specific thing and considering that it has a perspective too and let it be what it is and trying to understand or learn from it, yeah, can be, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think water is a living conscious being.
Hmm.
I mean, life could cannot exist without water, right? So why do we, well, like, why are we so surprised that when water is living, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, water can also um, destroy things, but yeah,
For sure.
not
Yes.
always so dreamy and magical. Yeah, it is a force. Look at all the floods that's happening.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. It's not to be underestimated or overlooked.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely all the. Ah, this is.
Um, I think that's a really wonderful thing to sort of leave people with as sort of an invitation for ways to consider and um, care for, interact with water in a more relational way. So thank you for kind of taking us to that point. Do you mind sharing for the listeners where people can find you on the internet, where they can learn more about your work? Do you like people to follow you on social media? Where can people do all of those things?
I have a website, aishathuda.com, and I'm also on Instagram. It's called Factory Mod On. It's
Hmm.
basically, yeah. I mean, I think if you write Huda, you can find that too. But that's it. I don't have any other social media, just Instagram and website. Yeah,
I think that's
and you can
plenty.
find. I think yeah, like on both you can find the work and some process images too.
Perfect. Well, we'll definitely make sure that we include links to those in the show notes for this episode so that it's easy for people to sort of click and find you on the internet. And I want to thank you for taking the time and also the courage to show up and share so intimately and beautifully about your work and your relationship with water and how that really informs who you are in your process. So thank you so much for sharing that. I've really enjoyed it. So
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for inviting me. This has been, yeah, fun.